Eva Kingma, thank you so much for being on Flute Unscripted.
Thank you so much for asking me.
It's really an honor. And, upon learning a little bit more about you and about your background and where you come from, and learning that your father is a sculptor, your mother was a pianist and singer, it's like a no-brainer. It kind of makes sense. You were almost destined to become a blend of the two professions of flute maker. Do you always feel like it was your calling?
No. There was always classical music in the house when I was a little kid. Always classical music. There was always a workshop because my father was making the sculptures at home. And I remember really well that even when I was 3 years old, I was always playing in the workshop of my father with tools. And there was even a moment that one of his friends said, "You allow your daughter at this age to play with a really sharp knife?" And he said, "Well, she will only cut herself once." And that was for me the way I started to learn how to hold tools. And for me, it's like a second nature.
Yeah, you've always been kind of curious about the making aspect. And I mean, this also kind of ran in your family. Your great uncle, who's Dirk Kuiper, he was the second flutist in the Concertgebouw orchestra, and he made flutes. And you had a lot of family visits where you got more and more interested in his workshop and in his career. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship with him?
Well, he knew me since I was walking around in diapers. There was always, when I grew up, this man, this uncle, who wasn't an easy personality. He had his moods, and in a way I was a little scared. But when I grew up, I always knew there was like a workshop somewhere in the back garden of his house, and he was doing amazing things there. But I always wanted to ask him if he wanted to show me around, and I never had the courage to do it. And finally, it was one moment that I promised myself not to leave that place without asking him. And when I asked him, he opened up and he showed me around. And by that time, I think I was 8 or 9. I was playing the recorder by that time. I was playing a lot with my mother. I really enjoyed the recorder. But for me, it was always like a step to the serious flute, to the real flute. And when I was 12, my father went over to my uncle Kuiper and changed one of his sculptures into a flute for me. And I started to play, and I also played with my mother. But finally, the fascinations for the keywork was like getting stronger and stronger. I started to take my flute apart. And there were many moments I had to cancel my flute lessons because the flute didn't work. There was one key left, or I had no clue how to put it together. But it was always, and it was getting stronger and stronger. The question, even maybe an obsession, how the keywork worked, and the logical thinking behind it. And yeah, over the time, it was like, this was the way to go. So I slowly killed my own flute. And when I was 18, I called my uncle for a repair. And he was in a bad mood. And he said, "Well, why don't you come over and do it yourself?" I was there the next day. And a lot of things happened. It was 46 years ago.
Yeah.
And the repair on my own flute, in a way, worked out well. It was a lucky shot. After that, a lot wrong. But he was slowly, because he just heard that he was becoming blind in 2 years, and he was depressed. And he said, "Well, I have to close the shop." And I was sitting there working on my flute, and from the first day on, everything fell in the right place. The smell, material, the smell of the shop, the working with your hands, the relation with music, the connection between the technical things and what's happening. It's a sort of a meditation in a way.
Yeah. I
So
wonder if
when,
do you feel like some sort of duty to him and to his name? I mean, when you took over the shop and in the 80s, did you feel like you kind of had to pay homage to him in a way?
oh, of course,
Yeah.
of course. And well, I took over the shop when after 6 years of working with him. With, if I look back to it, it was like so. It was too soon.
Yeah.
There was emergency because of his eyes, but there were still so many things until today. Yeah, I'm still learning, and it's a difficult. Flute making is difficult, and
Yeah.
and it's not getting easier.
I love that though, and I love your spirit of, always learning and kind of sticking with it. Do you feel like the profession itself is, a little isolating, or do you feel like you have camaraderie with other makers, and do you get together with other makers sometimes and chat? I know you're close with Dana Sheridan, and you've had friendships and collaborations with Vic Brannon. Uh,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
so very dear friends, and Toby Manke
Yep.
and Chris Bell and also like Dave and Dale Strobinger, and there's so many people, and yeah, some really wonderful friendships came out, and yeah, well, we are in a hard lockdown for weeks now in Holland, but I was thinking, flute making is being in a lockdown.
Yeah,
It
really.
puts you into isolation, but that's in a way the thing I always loved.
Yeah.
To be all by myself, and I'm working together with wonderful silversmith David Kerkhoff, who is here now for maybe 19 years, and he works here part-time. And he is the same. We both have the same passion, and he's a wonderful craftsman. But if you cannot be by yourself, flute making, I think, is not the right profession.
How do you, know if it's something that's right for you? I feel like this is not a career path that a lot of people talk about, and it's certainly not, a conventional career path. So do you have any wisdom or any advice for younger people that might be thinking of exploring?
That's a hard question. When I started at my uncle, I think I was there at the right place, at the right time. It was not something I had in mind. I mean, I've always been interested in how things were made, how they were making wooden shoes, how they were making candles, how everything from nothing until the final product. So that has always been my interest. I think it's really hard to find a place where you can start this profession. Of course, there are the big companies in America and in Japan. And I think it's not so easy to get there.
Yeah.
The only thing I can say is, yeah, it's a hard question, because I've been totally isolated with my uncle for 14 years. I was working on an island. I had no clue about flute conventions, about the NFA.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started to work with, with Albert Cooper, because, well, I went over to him. He was like God for me. For him to work on scale problems. He designed all my scales for the altos and the bass flutes. And for me, he was like an incredible person. And I still miss him every day dearly. But he said, Eva, you have to go to the NFA. And I said, no, Albert, I'm just too small for it. And I feel unsure, and there's still so many things to learn. He called me the next year and he said, Eva, you were not there. You have to go. And finally, something like, okay, let's give it one try. And I finally, after 14 years of being on an island, noticed that there were a lot of things going on.
Yeah, it's
and
a huge community. Yeah.
So many other things that made me, I already started to work together with well, Albert Cooper, and also with some other people. And some years later, Bigford Brennan and I started a collaboration on the alto flutes and later on the bass flutes. But that's where the friendships started. And I never forget the first convention. I was so nervous. I really was begging for a dark place at the exhibit hall.
That's funny.
So that people could not have a really close look at my instruments.
Right.
That was the first start. I think I've been to 30 until now.
Well, and I wonder, was it then kind of a full circle surreal moment when in 2018 you get a Lifetime Achievement Award from NFA? I mean, that's kind of funny to talk about not wanting to go and attend to then getting a huge award from them.
It's so many things started there, and also, yeah, to meet colleagues and to change the passion, and I never had the feeling that it was like a competitive thing. It was always, at least I never felt it.
Yeah.
And I have the feeling that my colleagues have always been super open and super supportive. And they were always willing to help me, to let me look at their things. If they were, for example, at the Brennan Company, there were some materials left or some tools left. And there was this question, is it something for you? Because we don't use it anymore, things like this.
Yeah.
And maybe to do with, I mean, I've got my own little island in this huge sea flute world. So I'm going my own way. It's altos and basses are like different instruments. So I think I'm not in the way, and I'm doing my own thing.
Sure. And I mean, in the early days of the company, alto flutes and low flutes are pretty unusual. So what was it in the beginning that got you so passionate about low flutes, and why'd you decide to make them your specialty, really?
Well, when I started at Kuiper, I had to start from scratch. So I had to make parts, I had to finish parts, I had to do soldering, everything. But because of the pressure on my uncle getting blind, everything was like, there was a lot of pressure to go into the production. So I started with C flutes, student model flutes, silver-plated flutes, later the silver flutes, alto flutes, gold flutes. So I've been into C flutes for 18 years. Every time when something happened, that it's something, it's a color that fits me. And for me, it was also a relief to hear another sound. So I decided which was like a big step, to finally make the decision to leave all the C flutes behind and focus and specialize in the alto flutes. And that took years. Working with Albert on the scales, trying to find your sound, which is like research that goes on until today.
Can you give us a little glimpse of what that kind of takes to find?
It's so hard to describe.
I'm sure.
But
yeah.
it's I never wanted an alto flute to sound like a low C flute. I think the alto flute on itself, it can be such a beautiful instrument. Also, I mean, most of the players are focused on the low notes, of course, in the altos, basses, contrabasses, sub-contrabasses that we are also making here. But a lot of people forget how beautiful the sound can be in the third octave. Mm. And I'm looking for an alto which has the ease and the comfort of a C flute, but really has this typical dark brown, focused, centered, balanced.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's, I think, what a lot of people are looking for out of an alto. So yeah, and I think that's why yours are so, in demand as well. That's kind of the dream alto flute.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
My has always been, I found the alto flute, it deserved more credit.
Yeah.
And for many, many years, and the same with the bass flutes. I mean, even if they were a little out of tune or whatever, you just played it for 5 notes in a year. And especially with bass flutes, I know many people who shared the bass flute, and yeah, it's out of tune, but who cares? It's just
right.
for a few. And that is something I never liked. And I also have been convinced that as long as the instruments are not sounding like main instruments and playing like main instruments, they will never get that credit. So the alto flute is my main instrument. It has the attention of a C flute in the way I make it. And yeah, it started with the closed hole alto, open hole altos, full Kingma system altos, curved head joints, B flutes, C flutes. I mean,
can you talk a little bit more about the inception of the Kingma system?
Well, we have to go back many years ago. It started with a Dutch flute player, Jos Swanenburg, who came into the workshop of Kuiper and me, somewhere mid-80, I think. And he asked for an open hole alto flute. I had something like open hole. We started to laugh. We had something like, who can play an open hole alto flute? For us, it was a joke. But he was very convinced that this was the way to go. And we made one, and we had never in mind that this was like such a big start, important start of so many other things later. And then we started to, well, there was this question that started, what about an open hole bass flute? It is totally ridiculous, because when you have an open hole alto, that's already on the limit of how far you can stretch your fingers on the open holes. With the bass flute, that is where we, both my uncle and I were triggered about finding a concept to make it work. And that's where the Kingma system started. So you're actually not on the original open holes, but it operates with little connections. It's like a key on a key.
Yeah.
And when that started to work, it was the beginning of the end. I mean, then there were so many other possibilities. It was like really, I still have the feeling that I opened the door, entered a room, started dancing, talking about all the past years. And over the time, I discovered many more doors. And there's behind every door is another place where I can dance. And I think I really need 3 more reincarnations to all the ideas, because I've always been surprised that things hardly changed after Bön.
And the Kingma system too has opened a lot of musical doors for people in terms of the possibility of quarter tones and multiphonics and everything too. So
yeah, and it's of course also it's not something I'm doing all by myself. It's also a result of a collaboration with modern flute players. Like I've been working closely with Robert Dick.
Yep.
For years. He had the first open hole bass flute, and he still has it. And I'm now working on a full Kingma system alto flute for him with all extra mechanisms and options. And I see the whole development in everything that I'm doing as, it's like an inspiration between the flute player and the maker. It would have been impossible without. I'm now working together with Matthias Ziegler for many years. I design instruments for him. He starts to create music. It's like a unique combination if you find the right the right person to do so. And the same with makers.
Right. And I mean, just to circle back again to the Lifetime Achievement Award and everything that kind of happened around that time, Brandon commissioned Anne LaBerge to basically compose a work that would utilize the Kingma system. And she compiled, she did a lot of research. She compiled the fingerings for the multiphonics and kind of has a legend of how to use it. So I feel like, was that also gratifying to see a work like that come to life and see her research?
Fantastic. There's so many. In a way, when I started to specialize in the low flutes, there were quite some colleagues and flute players who had something like, hey, there's hardly music written for it. How can you do this? And I started on the other end of this question. We first need to have like really wonderful or good playing instruments. That will challenge the flute player. And when there's more interest for it from the flute players, there will be more pieces for it. And that's exactly, and it's wonderful. It's really like one big motivation.
Yeah, it's great. It's like clockwork and it's all working together. Yeah. Has your approach to flute making, do you think, changed or evolved over the years?
Well, I asked Bigfoot Brennan, who became such a dear friend, maybe 12 years ago, to give me some more training in flute making. He sold his company. So he's retired. He lives in another place, and it's also a little workshop. And over the last years, I've been visiting him many times, sitting there in the workshop, doing basic things. And I mean, I learned so much from him, but to know more doesn't make the flute making easier. So that's sometimes a real struggle. I know that the instruments are so much better now than they've ever been.
Yeah.
But it's the more you know, the harder it gets. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it's a different approach now.
Flutes are of such high caliber these days that the standard, the expectation of makers and how they're finished, has risen.
Yeah. I mean, there are now so many instruments. That was also one of the reasons why I started to create my own little world. I mean, there's so much going on also in China and of course, always been in Japan. But there's so many good flutes now.
Yeah.
Nobody's waiting for another sea flute from this girl in Holland. So
you might be surprised. Yeah.
That you also interviewed my friend and colleague Lillian Burkert.
Yes, loved her.
And it's so funny because she is specialized in the piccolos, in the sea flutes.
Yeah.
And when we meet at the NFA, we sometimes have breakfast or lunch or whatever, and then we change ideas. But it's so funny. She has the piccolos and the sea flutes, and has a big company, in my opinion, like a really huge company. And I make the big flutes, and I insist to stay small. So it's the opposite.
Yeah.
So what she is doing would be impossible for me. I need to really be by myself, and for me, it's like already like a very busy company here.
Yes, well, and everybody has to do what works well for them, and it seems like you found your niche for sure.
And
yeah,
a lot of respect for how she's doing it. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Where do you draw inspiration from, outside of the flute community?
Oh, well, I'm a scuba diver.
Wow.
Yeah. And it has now been because of the lockdown a few years ago, but it's something I love to do. And it's maybe the combination between...
That's another, isolating kind of alone activity. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
A beautiful world with the fishes. I have been dives that I refused to go back to the normal world. It's But it's, I think, also the combination between the technical part, having control over yourself, the breathing, and feeling comfortable with yourself. And I'm doing a lot. I start my day, I wake up early, I start my day with walking. It's like 6-7 kilometers of real walking every day, no matter what the weather is doing, to give me a fresh start in the day, to stay healthy and sharp. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to find the rest in my head to do reading, but that's sometimes hard because there are always flutes in mechanisms. There's always, that's a second nature now, to figure out things.
Yeah.
I do something completely different, and then, okay, why didn't I think about this before? And how the whole thing started here.
Yeah.
Nobody tells me what to do. I have to figure it out myself.
All on your own. Yeah. Thank you for allowing us to have a little peek into your world. It was truly a pleasure, and it was really great getting to talk with you a little bit more.
Thank you so much. And I really hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you.